Tiffany Johnston was a bright and energetic 19-year-old woman with her whole future ahead of her. Born and raised in Anadarko, Oklahoma, she was known for her radiant personality and strong work ethic. She had recently married Ryan Johnston, and together they were excited about the life they were building. Tiffany was deeply loved by her family, especially her mother, Kathy Dobry, who always described her as a caring and responsible young woman. She had a tight-knit group of friends and was admired for her kindness and determination. Whether at work or spending time with her loved ones, Tiffany was the type of person who left a lasting impression. On the evening of July 26, 1997, Tiffany had plans to meet her husband for a night out at their favorite local dance club. Ryan worked late shifts, and their routine was to meet after he got off work at 11 p.m. But before their date, Tiffany had one quick errand to run. She needed to wash her car. She pulled into the Sunshine Car Wash in Bethany, Oklahoma, a suburb just outside of Oklahoma City. She was alone, and the clock was approaching 6 p.m. What should have been a simple and mundane task turned into the last time Tiffany Johnston was ever seen alive. Sergeant John Reed of the Bethany Police Department was patrolling the area later that night when he noticed something unusual: a white Dodge Neon parked in the far west stall of the Sunshine Car Wash. At first, he didn't think much of it, but something about the abandoned car stuck in his mind. Hours later, after responding to another call, he drove past the car wash again. The Dodge Neon was still there. This time, he stopped to investigate. Inside the unlocked car, he found Tiffany's purse and car keys. Nothing about the scene suggested a struggle, and there were no immediate signs of Tiffany. When the license plate was run through the system, it led officers to her mother, Kathy Dobry, who lived 60 miles away in Anadarko. Kathy was awoken by a phone call from the Bethany Police Department asking if Tiffany was with her. Confused and instantly alarmed, she informed them that Tiffany was supposed to be with her husband, Ryan. Kathy's heart sank. Something was wrong. She knew her daughter wouldn't just abandon her car and personal belongings. The night quickly spiraled into a nightmare as Tiffany's whereabouts remained unknown. The next day, on July 27, 1997, a horrifying discovery was made. Along Interstate 40 and Gregory Road, just west of Bethany, locals noticed an unusual disturbance in the grass. Their curiosity led them to a grim sight: the body of a young white female. Investigators were called to the scene, and soon after, the victim was identified. It was Tiffany Johnston. An autopsy would later confirm that Tiffany had been brutally assaulted and murdered. There were clear signs of sexual assault, and the manner of her death was disturbingly violent. But there was something odd about the circumstances. There were no indications of a struggle at the car wash. This meant one of two things. Either Tiffany knew her attacker and willingly got into their vehicle, or she had been forcibly abducted without enough time to resist. Ryan Johnston, Tiffany's husband, became an immediate person of interest, as spouses often do in cases like this. But Ryan had an airtight alibi. He had been at work from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., with multiple co-workers confirming his presence. There was no way he could have committed the crime. This left investigators scrambling for leads. The case soon went cold. No physical evidence tied anyone to the crime, and there were no eyewitnesses to place a suspect at the scene. For years, Tiffany's murder remained a mystery, leaving her family devastated and desperate for answers. Years later, in 2013, the investigation was reopened. Advancements in forensic science allowed authorities to re-examine the evidence collected from Tiffany's body. Swabs taken during the autopsy contained a partial male DNA profile, but the sample was too degraded to be entered into CODIS, the national DNA database. However, it was enough for comparison testing. Investigators set out to re-interview people connected to Tiffany. They collected DNA samples from her co-workers, ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, and even her husband again. Every single person was ruled out except for one. A tip from the owner of the Sunshine Car Wash reignited suspicion about a man named William Reese. The owner had seen a news report about an abduction in Texas and immediately recognized the suspect as a customer of his car wash. That man was Reese, a known violent offender with a disturbing history. William Reese had a long record of sexual violence. Originally from Oklahoma, he had been convicted of 2 sex crimes in Cleveland County before being released in 1996. But his criminal activities didn't stop there. In May 1997, just 2 months before Tiffany's murder, he had attempted to kidnap a pregnant woman named Sandra Sapor in Texas. He had slashed her tires at a Waffle House, pretended to help, then forced her into his truck at knife point. Sandra managed to escape by kicking open the truck door and rolling onto the highway. Could Tiffany Johnston have been one of his victims? Investigators were determined to find out. By 2014, investigators obtained a DNA sample from William Reese. When compared to the degraded DNA from Tiffany's body, it was a partial match. This meant that Reese, or one of his male relatives, was almost certainly responsible. But forensic science alone wasn't enough to close the case. Investigators needed a confession. Reese was already serving a 60-year sentence in Texas for kidnapping Sandra Sapor, so police had time on their side. They built their case meticulously, linking Reese to a series of disappearances and murders. They discovered that around the time of Tiffany's murder, 3 other young women had gone missing: Jessica Kane, Kelly Cox, and Laura Smither. The Texas Rangers offered Reese a deal. If he cooperated in their investigations, they would not seek the death penalty. Wanting to save his own life, Reese finally spoke. He admitted to being at the car wash that night. He told investigators that he had approached Tiffany, abducted her, and placed her in a horse trailer attached to his white dually pickup truck. Inside the trailer, he raped her before killing her. He then dumped her body near Interstate 40, where it was later found. But that wasn't all. Reese also confessed to the murders of Jessica Kane and Kelly Cox. He led authorities to their remains, which had been buried in different locations across Texas. With his confession, William Reese was officially charged with Tiffany Johnston's murder. His trial began in 2016, nearly 20 years after the crime. The jury delivered a swift and decisive verdict, guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Reese was sentenced to life in prison in Oklahoma before being extradited to Texas, where he faced additional murder charges. He was ultimately convicted for the murders of Jessica Kane, Kelly Cox, and Laura Smither. For Tiffany's family, justice had been a long time coming. Kathy Dobry had spent years fighting to keep her daughter's case alive, and now she could finally have some closure. Although no sentence could bring Tiffany back, knowing that her killer was behind bars provided some relief. William Reese, now a convicted serial killer, remains incarcerated. His past had finally caught up with him. For Tiffany Johnston and the other women whose lives he stole, justice had been served. One day after the discovery of Jennifer Brown's body, neighbors and loved ones are reflecting on her life. Jennifer, a 43-year-old woman from Limerick Township, Pennsylvania, went missing, leaving her 8-year-old son, Noah, alone at home. Concerned for her well-being, her close friend and business partner, Blair Watts, reported her disappearance on January 4th when he couldn't reach her. The community, along with authorities, embarked on an extensive search, hoping to find any clues that could shed light on her whereabouts. The questions linger. What could have befallen Jennifer? Why would she leave her son without any explanation? Limerick Township, located in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, is a township with a rich history. It was named after William Evans, an early settler whose family migrated from Limerick, Ireland, in 1698. Situated approximately 34 miles northwest of Philadelphia, the township is home to a population of over 20,000 residents. The Schuylkill River runs through the town, serving as a natural boundary between Limerick Township and Chester County. Notably, the Limerick nuclear power plant is a significant industry in the area, providing employment opportunities for many locals. Now, let us delve into the story that unfolds within the confines of Limerick Township. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979 in the United States, had a joyful and carefree childhood during the vibrant 80s. Unfortunately, little is known about her early life or her origins. In 2014, Jennifer became a mother for the first time, welcoming her beloved son, Noah, into the world. Despite facing the challenges of raising him alone, as his father was absent, Jennifer was a devoted mother who showered Noah with love and attention. This was especially important as Noah was diagnosed with autism at a young age, requiring additional care and support. Fast forward to 2023, Jennifer was now 43 years old, and Noah had turned 8. They resided in the peaceful embrace of 1408 Stratford Court, Limerick Township, Pennsylvania, finding solace in each other's company. Their close-knit bond was evident to their loved ones and neighbors, who admired their kind and compassionate nature. However, tragedy struck unexpectedly. On January 3, 2023, Jennifer Brown vanished without a trace, leaving behind a perplexing mystery. The last person to see her was her friend Blair Watts, who had visited her home between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. that day. Blair had agreed to pick up Noah from his bus stop after school, as they often enjoyed sleepovers at Blair's house with his own 3 children. The next day, on January 4th, Noah was dropped off at his bus stop by Blair and attended school like he always did. However, that day at school, Noah seemed distraught and was acting out in class in a manner that was quite unusual for him. Concerned about his behavior, his teachers tried to find out why he was acting like this, and they learned that he had missed the last 2 doses of his autism medication, something that never happened. Noah also told them that his mother had gone to the grocery store and never come back. This further worried his teachers as they knew Jennifer was a very hands-on mom who loved her son and would never forget to give him his medication and would never leave him alone. They tried to get in touch with her throughout the day but could not do so, which made them sure that something had gone wrong, as Jennifer always responded when it came to any problems her son might be having in school. At the same time that day, Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, had also been trying to get in touch with her but had had no success. He went over to Noah's bus stop at 4 p.m. that day to see if Jennifer would be there to pick him up, but she did not show. He picked up Noah himself and had no option left but to report her missing to the police at 4:20 p.m. that day. Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department went over to 1408 Stratford Court to conduct a welfare check on Jennifer's home after she was reported missing. He found that her car was parked outside her home, and after entering the residence, he found her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone were all still inside the house. However, her personal cell phone was nowhere to be found, and when the police tried to track it down, they found that it had been switched off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and hadn't been traceable since. Its last known location was within 400 meters of Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in Limerick Township. After Jennifer was confirmed as missing, a comprehensive investigation was initiated to determine what had happened to her. The police began by interviewing her family, friends, and neighbors to gather any information that could shed light on her disappearance. However, despite their efforts, no one had witnessed or heard anything during the time she went missing. Even Jennifer's aunt, Diane Bream, her friend, Tiffany Barron, and her business partner, Blair Watts, affirmed that Jennifer would never willingly leave her beloved son, Noah, behind. With no substantial leads to pursue, a search was conducted in the town and surrounding areas, involving both authorities and volunteers. Despite the collective efforts of many individuals, no traces or clues regarding Jennifer's whereabouts were found. Desperate for any information, her loved ones made public appeals, but unfortunately, no leads emerged. It seemed as though Jennifer had vanished without a trace, leaving little hope of finding her. However, on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance, 2 employees from a nearby warehouse stumbled upon a freshly dug hole while taking a smoke break in a field behind the building. To their horror, they discovered the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The police were immediately notified and, upon examination, confirmed that the woman was indeed Jennifer Brown, the person they had been tirelessly searching for. After the body was taken for examination, the examiners concluded that Jennifer's cause of death was homicide, although the specific means were not specified. They determined that she had died from asphyxiation, indicating that she had been either strangled or suffocated. Additionally, the discovery of 3 broken ribs suggested that she had put up a fight against her assailant, who had beaten her in order to subdue her. As a result, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a homicide, prompting the police to resume interviewing and interrogating individuals close to Jennifer, including her family and friends. Unfortunately, these interviews did not yield any new leads or information for the authorities to pursue. Consequently, they were unable to identify any potential suspects in the case, and it appeared as though the investigation would reach a dead end. However, unexpectedly, a lead emerged from an unlikely source. When news of Jennifer's murder became public, the police appealed to anyone with relevant information to come forward and share it. In response to this plea, one of Noah's teachers stepped forward and informed the police about a conversation she had with Noah on January 4th, the day Jennifer went missing. Initially considering the information unimportant, she later realized its suspicious nature after learning about Jennifer's death. According to her, Noah had disclosed that when Blair Watts picked him up from his bus stop on January 3rd, he had made a stop at Noah's house under the pretense of retrieving Noah's iPad. However, upon his return, Noah noticed that Blair had Jennifer's personal phone in addition to his iPad. Noah was certain that it was his mother's phone, as the lock screen displayed a picture of him from 2nd grade, which he immediately recognized. The police considered it a significant breakthrough when they discovered that Jennifer's killer had not taken her cell phone, as they had initially believed. This realization led them to focus their attention on Blair Watts, who became their primary suspect. In order to uncover any overlooked information, the investigators decided to thoroughly examine Blair's relationship with Jennifer. During their investigation, they were shocked to uncover several suspicious details. While their personal relationship seemed solid, with the two being close friends who spent a significant amount of time together and were familiar with each other's families and friends, their professional relationship as business partners revealed a different story. Blair had previously owned a restaurant called Birdie's Kitchen, which unfortunately closed down in early 2022. Seeking assistance, he turned to Jennifer, who agreed to invest in his business and help him reopen Birdie's Kitchen at a new location. They entered into a contract stating that Jennifer would provide financial support every 6 weeks, with the intention of reviving the restaurant. According to Blair, Jennifer had already sent him approximately $36,000 between August and January. Additionally, he claimed that she still owed him $9,000 as per their agreement. Blair had identified a new location for the restaurant and was supposed to pay the property owners and sign a lease in January 2023 to proceed with reopening Birdie's Kitchen. However, despite receiving the investment from Jennifer, Blair failed to fulfill his obligations to the property owners. Instead, he covertly spent the money on his personal indulgences and activities. On December 26, 2022, the property owners decided to withdraw their agreement with him due to his failure to fulfill the payment for the lease. This left Blair in a desperate predicament, as he had neither the funds nor a location to open his restaurant. the police suspected that, in his desperation, he had committed something heinous to save himself. To gather evidence, they examined the transaction history on Jennifer's iPad, which was present in her home. They discovered that on January 3rd, there were 2 unauthorized cash transfers totaling $17,000 from her account to Birdie's Kitchen. These transfers were not part of the written agreement between Jennifer and Blair. Furthermore, the transfers were unsuccessful multiple times, only becoming successful when the iPad's 2-factor authentication system was disabled. The police proceeded to interview the property owners who had terminated the agreement with Blair. They learned that on January 4th, the same day Blair reported Jennifer missing, he had approached the property owners claiming to have the necessary funds for the lease. This revelation strengthened the police's belief that Blair had murdered his friend and business partner. However, aware that Blair was unlikely to confess given the extent of his cover-up, the police recognized the need for additional evidence. They then questioned Blair's wife, Tiara Taylor, regarding his whereabouts on January 3rd, the suspected day of the murder. Tiara informed them that Blair had visited Jennifer's place around 1 p.m. and returned home at approximately 4:30 p.m. after picking up Noah from his stop. She added that Blair had only stayed at home briefly before leaving again around 5 p.m. and not returning that night. Investigating Blair's movements after leaving home, the police discovered that he had spent the night with his mistress, a woman named Tatiana Garrett. However, during the interview with Tatiana, she stated that Blair had only met her around 8 p.m. This indicated that there was a period of time between 5 and 8 p.m. where Blair's whereabouts were unknown. With this new information, the detectives were able to piece together a timeline of events leading up to the murder. According to their theory, Blair had visited Jennifer's house on January 3rd around 1 p.m., while Noah was at school and committed the crime. He then proceeded to transfer money from Jennifer's iPad to his own account before picking up Noah from the bus stop at approximately 4 p.m. Upon returning to Jennifer's home, he claimed to retrieve Noah's iPad but also stole Jennifer's mobile phone, a crucial piece of evidence that ultimately raised suspicion. Afterward, Blair returned home, dropped off Noah, and left again at 5 p.m. to collect Jennifer's body. He then drove to a field near Royersford, where he buried her in a shallow grave. Later that evening, he met with his mistress and spent the night with her, before returning home in the morning to drop off Noah at the bus stop. Blair then visited the property owners to inform them that he had the money for the lease, before returning to Jennifer's house around 4 p.m. His intention was to pretend to see if Jennifer would pick up Noah from the bus stop, thus allowing him to report her missing to the police without arousing suspicion. Blair had meticulously planned every step of his actions and might have succeeded if not for the mistake of letting Noah see his mother's phone. It was Noah's revelation to his teacher about the phone that ultimately led the police straight to Blair. With the accumulated evidence, the police had enough grounds to charge him. However, to ensure their case was solid, they employed a cadaver dog trained to detect biological remains. The dog was brought to Jennifer's home, where it identified the scent of death in her kitchen, confirming that she had been killed there. Blair was taken into custody on February 8th after the dog identified the same smell in his car, providing the detectives with the final piece of evidence needed for his arrest. He is facing charges of first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft, and is currently being held at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility without the possibility of bail. Jennifer's loved ones, while relieved that her killer has been caught, are still grappling with the shock of the situation. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's, expressed the surreal nature of the situation, stating, "It's like a scene from a movie, but unfortunately it's our reality. If found guilty, Blair could potentially spend the rest of his life behind bars." Tim and Kelly had a love story that began in high school. They were inseparable, spending time together whenever they could. Tim, a hard-working young man, often brought Kelly out to his family's farm, where they would enjoy the open land and each other's company. Their families believed they would eventually marry and spend their lives together. It seemed inevitable. They were a couple deeply in love, building a future together. On the evening of August 9th, 1980, Tim and Kelly attended a wedding reception at the Concord House, a banquet hall near an interstate in Wisconsin. They arrived around 10:30 p.m. and stayed for about 45 minutes. Witnesses recalled seeing Tim with a beer in hand, while Kelly had a soda. The couple seemed happy, enjoying their night before they were seen leaving the reception together. It was supposed to be a normal night, one of many they had spent together. But the next morning, everything changed. Tim's family expected him to be home early to help with farm chores, but when they woke up, he was nowhere to be found. Concern quickly set in. They reached out to Kelly's mother, hoping the couple had stayed at her house. When she said no, fear took over. Tim's family drove to the Concord House, hoping for answers. What they found instead was chilling. Tim's car was still parked outside. The driver's side door wasn't fully shut. His wallet was inside, untouched. There was no sign of Tim or Kelly. They had vanished. The search for the couple began immediately. Over the next 4 days, authorities interviewed employees of the Concord House and guests from the wedding reception. One recurring detail stood out. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a dark, dirty van lurking in the parking lot. One person even mentioned that the van had sped off in a suspicious manner. Given the isolated nature of the Concord House, which was surrounded by a large, dimly lit parking lot and sat close to the interstate, the possibility of an abduction seemed more likely with every passing hour. Then a discovery was made. A teenage boy working on a tractor noticed something unusual near the road, a pair of women's pants. The pants were the same style Kelly had been wearing the night she disappeared, but they had been cut from the ankle up to the waist. Investigators immediately feared the worst. If the pants had been cut away while she was still wearing them, it likely meant a sexual assault had taken place. Over the next 10 days, more of Kelly's clothing was found, scattered within a 6-mile radius of the Concord House, along with several pieces of rope tied in various complex knots. The findings painted a grim picture of what had likely happened to the young couple. 10 days after Tim and Kelly disappeared, a group of squirrel hunters from Milwaukee stumbled upon a horrific scene in a wooded area about 7 miles from the Concord House. They found a badly decomposed body. 100 yards away, they found another. Tim was still fully clothed, wearing the same outfit he had on the night of August 9th. Kelly's body showed signs of strangulation, with damage and insect activity concentrated around her throat. Tim had suffered multiple stab wounds. The nightmare was confirmed. Tim and Kelly had been murdered. Investigators focused on the pieces of rope found near the crime scenes. The knots were not ones an average person would tie. They included square knots, half hitches, clove hitches, and bowline knots, techniques commonly used by those with military or trade experience, such as carpenters and painters. Despite this clue, the case remained unsolved for over 2 decades. For the Hack family, life was never the same. They had to move forward without their oldest son. The pain of losing him, combined with the uncertainty of who had done it, weighed heavily on them. Years passed, but the case grew colder. Then, in the early 2000s, advances in DNA technology brought new hope. Investigators tested seminal fluid found on Kelly's pants and underwear, hoping for a match. Meanwhile, a breakthrough came in the form of a phone call. A woman named April reached out to the police. She told them she believed her father, Edward Wayne Edwards, was responsible for Tim and Kelly's murder. She directed authorities to a book he had written about his life as a career criminal. Edwards was no ordinary suspect. He had once been on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list and had even appeared on talk shows discussing his past crimes. Investigators discovered that Edwards had a history of violence and had been a suspect in a double homicide in Portland, Oregon, in the late 1960s. He was controlling, manipulative, and enjoyed inserting himself into public life under the guise of a reformed criminal. Even more concerning, he had a background in the military and knew how to tie complex knots, the very ones found near Kelly's body. Authorities learned that Edwards had lived near the crime scene in 1980, but had moved out of state shortly after Tim and Kelly's murders. When he was first interviewed by police in September 1980, he had a broken nose. He claimed he had injured himself in a hunting accident, but investigators found the explanation suspicious. In Wisconsin, deer hunting season occurs in November, not August. The pieces were coming together. Further investigation revealed that Edwards owned a van, matching the description of the suspicious vehicle seen in the Concord House parking lot. He also kept a .357 revolver in the van. It all fit. Authorities believed that on the night of August 9th, 1980, Edwards had been lying in wait outside the Concord House. Kelly was exactly the type of victim he sought. When the couple reached Tim's car, Edwards made his move. Tim, a strong farm boy, likely fought back, landing a solid punch that broke Edwards' nose. That's when Edwards retaliated, stabbing Tim to death before abducting Kelly. She was raped, strangled, and dumped in the woods. After nearly 30 years, police confronted Edwards. By this time, he was an old man, overweight, on oxygen, and confined to a wheelchair. Yet, his arrogance remained. He acted as if their visit was insignificant, as if he had already won. When asked for a DNA sample, he agreed, believing they wouldn't have any solid evidence. He was wrong. The DNA was a perfect match. During his interrogation, Edwards initially denied any involvement. But as the pressure mounted, he made a quiet, chilling admission, muttering under his breath, "Damn it, I killed her." It was undeniable. The man responsible for the brutal murders of Tim and Kelly had been caught. Ultimately, Edwards pleaded guilty. But Tim and Kelly weren't his only victims. He also confessed to murdering his foster son, Danny. Some even believe he was the infamous Zodiac killer due to his history of targeting couples, his drifting lifestyle, and eerie coincidences in his name's letter count matching Zodiac ciphers. Edwards was sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to the Ohio Corrections Medical Center, where he died in 2011. His capture brought a sense of relief to the families of Tim and Kelly, but it could never bring back what they had lost. Their children had been stolen from them in an act of pure evil. For the Hack and Drew families, justice came late, but it came nonetheless. They finally knew the truth. Tim and Kelly's story had been one of young love, of a future that should have been. But in the end, it became a case of tragedy and perseverance, of a family's long fight for answers, and of a killer who, despite his belief that he had outsmarted everyone, was finally caught.